Hello everybody, it's the Shoddy Strawman, and today I'm here for a little Christmas special going over the history of Hale and Little Cup. Now, before I get started, make sure to have a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Thank you very much for coming and giving me the time of day to help me keep doing this content. I really appreciate it. So first, let's go over Diamond Pro Platinum Little Cup, where Snover turns out is actually A+ tier. Reason being is that it pairs up really well versus Gligar. Rain is actually a threat in this tier. If you see Mantyke's A-, and being able to auto-set the weather back to hail as opposed to rain is really good. You pair well against Chinchou. Really cool stuff. And it's got quite a few sets that you can run. So first, you have the attacking lead set. You have a dedicated lead in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. You don't have team preview, so you can't choose it after the fact. But setting up hail in order to chip down your opponent is really nice stuff. Just get that little bit of chip damage that you need in order to get some KOs. Pretty nice. But you have Protect to not get hit by Fake Out. Then you have Blizzard, Ice Shard, Energy Ball. Blizzard is really strong. Special Stab. That doesn't miss in Hail. You have Ice Shard for a bit of revenge killing dealing with Gligar. Then you have Energy Ball as pretty alright Grass Stab. So that we can still hit your opponent pretty well. Overall, really good stuff. Also, you'll see Oranberry run in this tier because there is no Eviolite yet, and Berry Juice is banned. So, in order to be a bit bulkier, you run Oranberry as opposed to running Eviolite. Next up, Choice Scarf set. You get up to 14 speed with a positive nature, so you're just barely where you need to be in order to be a good Scarfer. Anything below 13, you need to have at least 14. If you get to 13, you only get up to 19 with a Scarf, and then some mons get that naturally, such as Gligar. So you want to have at least 14. But you have Blizzard, Energy Ball, you have Water Pulse for fire types that want to come in on your stabs, and then you have Hidden Power Fire in order to hit steel types, as well as opposing Snover. Pretty nice. Then you have your Sword Stance set, you have Ice Shard, you got a pretty alright attack set of 62, and you can boost that even further with Sword Stance, become an absolute monster that your opponent does not want to switch into. And it's really hard to revenge kill because of your Ice Shard. And then you get to deal with stuff like Tier King Munchlax because it's too slow. You also have Tier King Gligar because of Ice Shard. It's really hard to deal with. Pretty great. Next up, we have the Lure set. And what it's supposed to do is that it's supposed to be in very heavy air quotes mixed set. So you use Blizzard into your opponent in order to be able to do a lot of damage really quickly. And then they go to their checks and like, oh, well, I can go Munchlax, it's got thick fat, or I can go into my Mantyke, it's got a ridiculous special defense stat. Like, some mons with Eviolite get up to this. It's pretty crazy. And then, instead of being completely walled by Munchlax and Mantyke, you instead use Woodhammer instead, and then you just break over them because they're special walls, not physical ones. So you effectively lure them and do a whole bunch of damage to them, and they have a much harder time being able to check this. Pretty funny. You also have Hidden Power Fire for hitting stuff like Bronzor, other steel types, that kind of stuff. It's a really, really successful generation for Snover, despite the fact that it's got some okay stats, but nothing special. I mean, like, it's got 60s, and those aren't bad, especially because you have 60 HP, 50 defense, and 60 special defense. That's pretty bulky. But your speed's really bad. That's the main issue, is that you would much rather be a bit faster than this. But you can make it work, and that's the important bit. Next up, we go to Generation 5. And it's once again really good. And the reason for that is that Hippopotas and Drillbur are really popular. You have Sandstream, you have Sand Rush. In order to be able to combat that really effectively and win the weather war, you can use Snover. And it's actually pretty alright as a defensive option because of grass types. So that means it can take Hippopotas, Earthquake really well, take an Earthquake from Drillbur, and even if they're like, oh, well, they're Rock Slide into you, well, then you can just use your newly acquired Gauge Rain in order to regain back your health and do a lot of damage back. Plus, you have Ice Shard to not even have to take the Rock Slide, so that's pretty nice. You run Protect on the Eviolite variant, so that way you can stall out some turns, get some more Hail Chip. And the funny thing is, you don't have any Slush Rush users yet, so what are you going to use as your Hail Sweeper? You use Smooch 'em with a Choice Scarf. It's just kind of funny, because you're like, well, why Smooch 'em? It's not bad, and you can still use Blizzard, and that's the big selling point, if you can do Scarf Blizzard to just wreck through your opponent's team. It's just kind of funny because you think like, oh, well, you got like Swift Swim users, you got Chlorophyll users, what do you got? I just throw a Choice Scarf on a Smooch 'em, and it just works. So, hey, what You can't really argue with it. If it works, it works. So there you go. But also because the metagame is a lot slower, and because you've got some good bulk already, you can kind of slow down the pace of the battle quite a bit. Don't have to be as hyper-offensive because of the addition of Eviolite. You can even slap it on your Snover, be a pretty decent wall, and you have some recovery with Giga Drain, reset weather. Perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable, perfectly serviceable. But then in Generation 6, you really fall off, and the reason for that is because fighting types are just absolutely everywhere. This is viability rankings for X and Y. Even if it was in 2014, you have Mienfoo, Pawniard, Timburr. Like, those are just the 3 best mons in the tier, and you're trying to run an Ice type. And then something gets bonked by Mienfoo, bonked by Iron Hit from Pawniard, bonked by Mach Punch from Timburr, in addition to Drain Punch. And then you just have stuff like Ponyta in A+ tier, and as well as Fletchling. You're going to have a really hard time using Snover effectively. And even if we look at this viability ranking, Snover is all the way down in C+ tier. It's really not good. I mean, you can still run your usual Blizzard, Giga Drain, Ice Shard sets, but then you have Hidden Power Rock for fire types. So that we can hit something like Larvesta. You could hit Fletchling on the switch in with, like, oh, well, I can use Giga Drain, but then Fletchling can come in. So instead, I'll use Hidden Power Rock as a nice mid-ground option that'll still hit fire types. And then you can also use the Eviolite set, but Rain also isn't permanent anymore, and that's a really big damper on it. Because before, you could get a whole bunch of chip damage throughout the course of the game because they would always keep on getting shipped by the hail, and you couldn't stop it unless you had your own weather setter. But now it'll just go away naturally, and 5 turns is significantly worse than infinite. Smoochum, you can't even, well, you don't really want to use as a hail sweeper anymore, because you can just do Life Orb and all this other stuff. You can just be a regular Choice Scarf user and not have to rely on Hail Blizzard in order to be reliable, so that was a bit of a hit to it. Amora was also introduced, and it has Snow Warning, so that means there's competition for Snover, which isn't bad, because, I mean, if you get more support, you get more support, but then you can do Refrigerate Hyper Voice, you can also do Berry Juice set with Rock Polish, but it's just kind of hard to justify, oh, why should I use my Snover when I can kind of use the new Amora with either Rock Polish and a much stronger special attack stat. You have Refrigerate Hyper Voice in order to do a lot of damage. So it's kind of hard to justify Snover. But that's how things are sometimes. Snover will get his revenge, don't worry. Then in Generation 7, you actually got Slush Rush users. So that means you have some reliable Hail Sweepers. You don't have to rely on slapping a Choice Scarf onto something and then just hoping and praying. Well, you wouldn't hope and pray, but the point still stands. You have a much more reliable way of using your snow or hail much more effectively. You can still use your Choice Scarf set as always because you reach the barely there threshold, but now you have Hidden Power Ground as your most reliable thing to hit things with, so that we can hit Pawniard, you can hit Magnemite, you can hit Ponyta, but it's kind of yikes because those are all really high up. You still have to deal with Mienfoo and Timburr and Pawniard. You have to deal with Magnemite. You have to deal with Ponyta. Still yikes. Still yikes. You don't have to deal with Larvesta anywhere near as much because Vullaby and Onyx are everywhere. So you don't have. That's why you're not running Hidden Power Rock. But it's still kind of yikes overall because as much as you want to be like, oh yeah, Snow Warning Blizzard, that's still good, right? It's not really worth using the entire Pokemon with, because you're still an Ice type and you're weak to rocks. And you can still run your Eviolite set, but being weak to rocks is just such a killer. But having Cubchoo, Ice Punch, Super Power 120, that's really nice for breaking through walls that would normally deal with you like a Steel type. You have Play Rough for dealing with opposing fighting types, so that way, even if it's like, oh, well, I have my Timburr, I can switch in, it's whatever. But then you take a really rough Play Rough to the face, and it's going to sting when Cubchoo's got 70 base attack. It's not going to be like this little, like, oh, well, it's fine, I can take a hit. Nah, it's really strong. And then you got Surf for fire types as a interesting little coverage move. But then also, Sandshrew Alola, I think this is probably the best one that you got. But Slush Rush, Icicle Spear, it's unreliable, but you can kinda make it work. Kinda. But then you have Iron Head plus Earthquake, which is really good coverage, and Swords Dance to boost your attack even further, meaning that it's really hard for your opponent to be able to switch into this. If your opponent gives this a free turn just to get a Swords Dance up, they're going to be experiencing quite a lot of pain, barring Timber in the back. But you also can run a Choice Scarf set with Slush Rush. That's pretty nice. But then also, Amora now runs Snow Warning Blizzard, which is pretty cool. But if you're running a Snow Warning Scarfer, I'm pretty sure you want to run Amora anyway, because it's got better coverage. It's got Earth Power, so it doesn't have to rely on Hidden Power Ground. It's got Ancient Power, which is also boosted by Stab, so that means you can still hit stuff like Larvesta and Flying types if you need to. It's like a good middle ground option. And then you also have Thunderbolt, so that we can hit Waters. You could run Freeze Dry if it was evolved, and you get it in the next generation. But being able to hit Waters like Marianne super effectively is really nice. Hail is okay. If you go to Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, and you look up Amora, C+ rank, then you have Sandshrew Alola and C, you got Snover and C-. I don't think you don't have Cubchoo. But you have options now. If you want to run this kind of funny Hail stuff, you can. And it's not abysmal, but it's not great either. But then you get to Generation 8, and you actually got some promising stuff going on because of two reasons. First, Sandshrew Alola gets Triple Axle, so that means you have a much more reliable stab move that it's not just gonna... you have like a 50% chance of doing basically no damage. You have 10% 3 times, which, I mean, it's better. And you get up to, I think it's 120. Yeah, because you do 21st one, 42nd one, 63rd one, total 120. And because of the multi-hit, it's still really, really powerful. But then you also can do Earthquake. Rapid Spin boosts your speed now, in addition to having a good power buff. So if you can manage to finish off your opponent with that, you can be a Hail Sweeper even outside of Hail, meaning that Hail's actually really good, and you still have your typical Swords Dance stuff. And then you have Icy Rock Snover as opposed to anything else. You run Protect now for First Impression from Trapinch. It's pretty neat. And although Mienfoo is still Tier King, if we look at the viability rankings, you're in B- now, which is significantly better than C. But Mienfoo there is like, oh, well, shouldn't that be an issue? No, because Coughing got introduced. My man, the myth, the legend. It's got Neutralizing Gas, and that means that Mienfoo, it's one of its biggest selling points was Regenerator. It can come in, take a hit, and then restore it back. But because of Coughing negating that, Mienfoo has a much harder time being able to check Sandshrew Alola anywhere near as effectively. Meaning that Hail got better. And it's got better in a pretty big way. For the longest time, Timber was not A- tier. It was lower. And the reason for that is that Mienfoo just outclassed it pretty hard. And you no longer have to deal with a whole bunch of teams like liking Mach Punch Timber into your Sandshrew Alola. So it gives you more space. And the funny thing with Snover is that I think it's getting the biggest buff possible. Well, not possible, but it's doing a pretty big buff in the next generation. You see this Onix? You see how it's got a defense stat of 22, and how when boosted by Eviolite, it'll get up to 33. They gave that to Snover now in current Generation 9, because Snow Warning now summons Snow, which boosts your defense stat as an Ice type, which is frankly ridiculous because this can turn from 15 to 33. You take so many hits so well, so often, is crazy. You have a good matchup versus Toedscool, good matchup versus Quaxly, good matchup versus Girafarig. You can 1v1 Girafarig. Ain't that crazy? Oh, it's a nice little Christmas gift for Snover. And Rain came back because you can actually use Wave Crash, Weasel. You also have Psyduck, and Psyduck got Nasty Plot. So both of these got pretty usable. But now you have an auto Snow Setter that can take a whole bunch of attacks from Weasel, be able to gain it back through Giga Drain, and then if you need to, you can Terra-type Ice to make yourself not weak to stuff like Flying-type moves, Fire-type... Well, not anywhere near as bad versus Fire, Fighting-type, like that kind of stuff. And you still retain your defense boost. And that's really important for stuff like Quaxly, because like, oh, look, I can just Brave Bird into you. Well, I can just Terra-type Ice, be able to keep my defense boost, still be able to bonk Quaxly, still be able to bonk Toadschool, still be able to bonk Girafarig, and you even chunk Pawniard pretty hard because you have enough special attack in order, like, you can invest enough into special attack to bonk things really hard. It's surprisingly good. You think, like, oh, well, it should be kind of bad, though, because you have stuff like Glimmet, you got stuff like Gastly. Nah, bro, you're at B-. You're still pretty good. I'm expecting this to rise throughout the course of the generation just because having a wall that deals with both of the spinners and Girafarig, in addition to dealing with the entirety of Rain all by itself, even if your Rock's weak, it doesn't matter all that much because you're just such a hard counter to a lot of things. It's pretty crazy. And I think that's probably the best Christmas gift Snover can get. It made itself much more reliable because before it was just like, well, you have to use it on Hail. You have to use it as the Hail setter. But now it's got this nice little niche for itself where even though it still is dependent upon the snow, but because of the snow, it can be used in a lot wider of an application across multiple teams. Like in previous generations, if you wanted to be like, oh, well, I'm going to run Snover as a defensive Pokemon so that way you don't get wiped by a Rain team. Well, you kind of have to deal with the fact that you don't have a lot of bulk because you don't have the defense boost from before. And although you got good bulk, your speed's kind of bad, and all these other things. But then in current generation, it can just take a whole bunch of stuff and then also clap back pretty hard. It's crazy. And that's all that we have for the current history of Snow and Hail and Little Cup. I'm hoping to get more into Snover as it goes on and seeing how well this Christmas tree can grow as it goes on. But I'm really happy with where it's going. I'm hoping it's going to keep being as good as it is. And thank you all very much for joining me on this journey. I really appreciate all the support that I've been getting. It's pretty crazy, but thank you all so much. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave comments down below for any sort of videos that you want to see in the future. Thank you all very much. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I really appreciate you taking your time to watch me.